Hello and welcome to the ISJ Leaders in Security podcast. My name is James Thorpe and I'm the editor of International Security Journal. In today's episode, I'm delighted to be joined by Andy Edwards, VP of Strategic Development for GardaWorld Security's Critical Infrastructure and Government Services Division. Andy is a veteran of the Royal Marines and Special Boat Service. He transitioned into the private sector as a security consultant for various blue chip companies, news networks and international development agencies. As Vice President of Strategic Development at GardaWorld Security, Andy continues to leverage his experience in high-stakes environments, bringing insights and leadership to the forefront of the company's global initiatives. Andy, thank you so much for joining me today for this discussion. Can I just first ask by asking how you are, please?
Well, thanks, James. Yeah, I'm well. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Very well. Been doing a lot of travelling recently, and it's nice to be back in the UK and actually speaking to you overseas as well. So looking forward to today's discussion. Well, obviously the two of us are going to be exploring the real world challenges of providing protection and stability in some of the world's most volatile environments. When we look at these environments specifically where governance may be weak or regulatory enforcement is inconsistent, and I guess that traditional rulebook no longer applies, maintaining security and doing so responsibly is both a challenge but also an obligation. From adhering to international standards and prioritising human rights to deploying defensive, community-sensitive protective services, GardaWorld Security has built a reputation for delivering solutions that are not just effective but also ethical and sustainable. So I guess the first point I want to jump to today, Andy, is for you personally and for you as a business, what does it mean to operate in an environment where that traditional rule book no longer applies? Can you just tell us your insights on that, please?
Yeah, sure. So we've got now over 20 years of operational experience in these some of the world's most complex environments. So by now, we've honed our approach to entering and working within them pretty well, I think. You need to adapt rapidly to evolving conditions and rely deeply on local intelligence. That'll be a common theme throughout. Ground truth and leverage your own internal extensive, in our case, operational expertise. Flexibility, you really need to be quite flexible. Maintaining good situational awareness, scenario planning, I think is essential in order that you can anticipate risks. You need to establish clear, internally driven compliance and operational protocols aligned to international standards, and quite often there aren't any local standards to be applied, so international standards are all the more important. And I think a good example of where we've hit the ground running pretty hard would be in 2003, our US Army Corps of Engineers program in Iraq, where there was no governance structure, there was no government. We were hired by the US government to mobilize hundreds, if not thousands, of security personnel from different countries and provide security for Corps of Engineers personnel moving up and down, and all of our staff using weapons, and from time to time coming up against armed insurgents, and just always in that high risk environment. And so maintaining that situational awareness, running your scenario planning, continually engaging with local communities was really key to the success of that program.
That's really interesting when you talk about actually that local engagement, because I think when we think about the idea of governance structures collapsing, I think obviously to a lot of people who've maybe not worked in that field that you guys are in or experienced something like that firsthand, it's quite an abstract concept. For me personally, it is certainly as well. How do you maintain continuity beyond the points you've just raised when those structures do fall apart?
So first and foremost, you utilize established SOPs, standard operating procedures, that remain effective regardless of external governance conditions. So industry best practice from other similar theatres in the region or around the world. We're able to leverage, GardaWorld's able to leverage a pretty robust global infrastructure for logistics and operational resilience. And I think by now we're pretty well proven through now decades of successful operations in some of these fragile states. Building and maintaining strong community stakeholder relationships for local support and intelligence, I think that's probably the key one. I said it's going to be a theme right the way through. I think we've become very good at building these relationships with local key stakeholders, and utilizing local first employment policies to good effect when we've been working in some of these fragile states. So hopefully that answers the question reasonably well.
Absolutely. It's really interesting to hear. And obviously, two of the points you touched on there as well, and like you said as well, which will kind of feed into our general discussion, it's also this idea of locality and community. That also ties in well with people. And when we look at human rights and how they come under strain in some of these fragile states, can you tell us and give us a bit of an insight into how PSCs protect and uphold them in its operations, please?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak on behalf of the entire industry. I can speak on behalf of ourselves and some of the larger ones. But I'd say that, one of the most important things is the adherence to the voluntary principles on security and human rights, or it's commonly known as VPSHR, and the International Code of Conduct, which many of the larger security organizations and quite a lot of the smaller organizations have signed up to now. And I think any company that's operating within a fragile environment should really be members of ICOCA, the International Code of Conduct Association, which really kind of oversees security companies like us and ensures that they are in adherence with the voluntary principles wherever they operate around the world. Training and vetting, comprehensive training and vetting of personnel to uphold those ethical standards and human rights compliance. Absolutely essential. VPSHR training is a prerequisite of any training, or should be a prerequisite of any training program of personnel working in these environments. Proactive engagement with local communities to ensure operations are culturally sensitive and respectful. Every part of every country is very different. I think they're important parts to ensure that your staff, your workforce, and the wider business are aware of. And I touched on it a moment ago, this local first recruitment policy, designed to upskill local communities and create an enduring local economy. And that's just a fantastic way to uphold standards.
Yeah, fantastic. And one of the kind of key terms we chatted about beforehand in the planning to this session is the idea of acceptable risk. That's something I want to have a quick look at. And I want to just find out a little bit about how you define it and who defines acceptable risk in, for example, post-conflict zones. Can you tell us a bit about that, please, Andy?
Yeah, very much collaboration, first and foremost. We could be in the most dangerous parts of the world right now, but in the absence of clients, we're not making any money. We are a business after all. So very much collaboration between ourselves and our clients, then also the local communities within which we're going to be working.
Of course.
Ultimately, can we operate safely in support of our clients within these markets whilst maintaining not just international standards or in adherence to international standards, but also our own internal risk management frameworks? And that's the first response to the question. I think it's important to do continuous proactive risk assessments. It's one thing mobilizing, but those continuous proactive risk assessments are really critical, especially when the situation is quite fluid. Our regional risk assessment team, what used to be known as our risk analysis team, they really do play an instrumental role in this effort by advising us what's going on the ground and how situations are changing. And, you can see what's going on in the news in some of the markets around the region right now. Those regional risk assessment teams are really playing an instrumental role right now, even in the more established markets that we've been working in for decades. Say that it's equally important to conduct regular reviews and site audits to ensure that operational alignment with dynamic risk environments are in tune. And, for us, we leverage pretty well, I think, that extensive field experience, and we try and get ahead of the game as much as we possibly can in order that we can make some really good, informed decisions when the risk dynamics change somewhat. And we're seeing some interesting developments in certain key markets right now, and it's really through that extensive field experience that we're able to provide, very good, very quick, very deliberate information that will steer decision-making process on the part of our clients.
Okay, thanks for that. One of the things we've also chatted about, and you highlighted earlier, is this, falling in line with international standards and setting yourself against benchmarks. And obviously that ties quite a lot in naturally with compliance, which I can imagine is a huge talking point when you're working in these particular environments. When it actually comes to the practicality of it, how do you find you can actually ensure compliance with laws and regulations when there is that kind of lack of enforcement in these environments you're in. Can you just give us a bit of an insight into how that actually looks hands-on, please?
Yeah, sure. I mean, first of all, we endeavour to ensure that we're always in compliance with any laws and regulations that exist. But we also have pretty strict internal compliance mechanisms and oversight, which are independently audited against international standards. So we have almost two layers. And I'd argue that the second layer is more important, perhaps in some cases, than the first. We also rigorously train, not a big fan of the word rigorous, but rigorously train our workforce. We have very good internal accountability measures and compliance frameworks to ensure adherence regardless of local enforcement capacity. What we find quite often is that just for example's sake, the training requirements in a market will be very short and sharp. The bare minimum is very, very low bar to cross. So we will overlay our own training programs in order that we've not only got a training program which is compliant with local laws and regulations, but is in line with the training requirements for the job the individuals are going to do, and adds in all of those other modules that I talked on earlier on, like cultural sensitivity, like VPSHR, and so forth. Active partnerships with internationally accredited, credible bodies, maintaining that industry leadership in ethical and compliant security operations. I think they're equally important. I think it's important that especially large organizations like us really do lead from the front and set the standard, and in the hope that the rest of the industry will follow.
Fantastic. And I mean, when we actually think and look at the private sector's role in stabilising fragile environments, how do you see that sector's part of it? Because we've talked a lot about when governance frameworks, law enforcement frameworks may fall apart, and there is that need for that private sector involvement. But in your opinion, what really is that role? What does that look like in 2025 and beyond?
Well, first of all, I think we all need to act as responsible, ethical partners in fostering stability, economic development, and community support. We try where possible to hire from the immediate vicinity of the operations that we're conducting. So if we've got an oil and gas project in a very remote part of a complex environment, then we will try our best to hire from the immediate community in order that we're putting something back into it. And that could be, it's obviously money, but it's also learning and development. We're building capacity across that local community. Complement rather than replace local governance, enhance local capacity, and contribute as positively as we can do to community resilience. As I say, putting something back into that local community is, I think, essential, and it's been a real key to our success in some of the markets that we operate within. Providing vital infrastructure protection, allowing humanitarian and government functions to operate effectively. Private security the world over provides guarding services for facilities. It's not a police or a military job to do that and many of the other roles that we can fill. And I think that there's certainly other countries that we would like to be working in where private security companies could be more effectively, and probably some sectors where larger, more qualified security companies like us and many other, and several others could be playing a bigger role in providing security and protection for infrastructure, particularly in the humanitarian space where humanitarian organizations aren't particularly reliant upon security companies.
Yeah. That's fantastic, and thank you for sharing those insights with me. And finally, there's one kind of area I want to look at. I mean, obviously, the world is changing such a rapid rate. There's a lot of new technology. There's obviously a lot of conflicts also happening around the world right now. And I think a key point I want to just quickly touch on is the idea of misconception. From your perspective, and it'd be great to hear your personal thoughts on this as well, is what is that one misconception people may have about operating in these environments that you would actually like to challenge and give a little bit more insight on, that people may not see when they kind of, they might see a press release or a news story, but what is one of those misconceptions you want to challenge, Andy?
Yeah, it's taken 20 years to shake off the stigma of private military company operations in the Middle East and Africa, and some of the very negative incidents that occurred. And without going into the specifics, I think there's definitely still a misconception that private security companies operate outside legal and ethical boundaries, and that we're alone to ourselves. And the reality is, reputable PSCs that do hold, industry standards, and not just pop-ups that appear one day, gone the next. Like ourselves and a few others, we operate pretty strictly within international laws and ethical frameworks, and we prioritize transparency, accountability, community integration as core operational principles. We are, as an example, we are probably one of the largest private sector employers of host country nationals in several of our key markets. And I think, this is also exemplified by long-standing industry leadership, robust global accreditations, active role in international regulatory bodies such as ICOCA. I think we're not an exception. We and several other larger companies and many smaller companies have really tried their best to shake off that stigma, but it still lingers, unfortunately.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. And I mean, obviously, one of the things with that as well, I guess, is just kind of communicating with the market. And like we're talking today, that communication is probably really key as well.
Yeah, I think so. I think just direct engagement. If we had more engagement with those organisations that perhaps see us as something other than a force multiplier in these complex environments, I think we could resolve a lot of these issues and shake off that stigma, at least with the people that we're meeting and subsequently working with. Just need to engage more, I guess.
Fantastic. Andy, absolute pleasure to speak with you today. Thank you for taking the time to join. For everyone looking to find out more about what GardaWorld Security Services are and find out a little bit more about the operations and mission they're undertaking, I encourage you to visit their website. Thanks for listening.
Thanks very much, James. Pleasure talking with you.
Thank you.